A quiet suburban street on a warm summer evening in 1976. The cicadas are buzzing in the trees, the smell of fresh-cut grass hangs in the air, and then you hear it, the distant, tinny jingle of the ice cream truck winding its way through the neighborhood. Instantly, screen doors slam, sneakers pound against the pavement, and kids dart out from every direction, quarters clutched tightly in their sweaty palms. Bell-bottoms flap, striped tube socks flash, and in the chaos of laughter and shouts, you notice something else. Bright toys clutched in their hands, treasures of the time that defined an entire generation's childhood. The 1970s were a playground all their own. It was a decade of shag carpets and avocado green kitchens, yes, but also a time when toys weren't just things you played with. They were companions, storytellers, and the foundation of our most vivid memories. Long before smartphones and tablets, our worlds were lit by the flicker of Saturday morning cartoons, the crack of baseball bats in neighborhood sandlots, and the endless imagination poured into games that could stretch across entire afternoons. And that's what we're diving in today. 15 unforgettable toys and games from the 1970s that brought us together, shaped our playtimes, and still bring a smile to our faces decades later. You'll remember the click of plastic discs, the stretch of rubber figures, the neon glow of pegs in a Lite screen, and maybe even the feel of a pet rock resting safely in its cardboard box. Some of these were fads that burned bright and fast. Others became lifelong staples of family game nights, but all of them carried the same magic. The magic of a simpler time, when joy came in the form of a $3 toy from the local Five and Dime, or in the laughter of friends sprawled across a shag-carpeted floor. So, let's take a deep breath, step back in time, and relive the toys and games we all loved in the 1970s. The game of life. Spin that colorful plastic wheel, watch it click around, and suddenly, you're off on the journey of life. If you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you remember the game of life stretched out across the dining room table, its winding plastic roads dotted with little houses, stop signs, and those tiny cars filled with pastel-colored pegs. There was something magical about tucking a little blue or pink peg into your car and imagining yourself heading off to college, buying a house, or landing your dream job. Originally created back in 1860, but completely modernized for the post-war era, life in the 70s reflected both the optimism and humor of the times. You could become a doctor, a teacher, or if luck failed you, you might wind up flat broke, all determined by that satisfying spin of the wheel. And while the choices seemed simple, the games somehow mirrored real life's unpredictability in a way kids found hilarious and parents found oddly accurate. But more than the rules, what we remember most is the feeling. Laughter around the table, the sound of siblings arguing over who got the better job, and the smug pride of filling your tiny car with a row of plastic kids. It wasn't just a game, it was practice for dreams with all the fun of imagination included. Connect 4. Pretty sneaky, sis. If you heard that line in the late 1970s, you probably cracked a smile, because Connect 4 wasn't just a game, it was a cultural moment. That bright yellow plastic grid with its red and black discs became a staple of family rooms and classrooms alike, and its appeal was simple. Drop a disc, watch it slide into place, and try to beat your opponent by lining up 4 in a row. The clink of those checkers dropping into the slots is still etched in memory, and so is the triumphant cheer when you finally got your 4 lined up diagonally. It was easy enough for kids to pick up quickly, but strategic enough to keep adults hooked too. Milton Bradley first launched Connect 4 in 1974, and it spread like wildfire, advertised on TV with catchy jingles and unforgettable taglines. It was also one of those games that had just the right balance of fun and frustration. Siblings would accuse each other of cheating, friends would sneak in accidental double drops, and when the last disc fell, everyone leaned in to make sure the winner hadn't pulled a fast one. Simple, portable, and endlessly competitive, Connect 4 proved that sometimes the best games are also the simplest. Battleship. You sunk my battleship. Few phrases captured the playful drama of the 1970s like that one. Battleship wasn't flashy, but it had an irresistible charm. 2 fold-up plastic cases, tiny white and red pegs, and the thrill of calling out coordinates like some kind of naval commander. The game had been around since the 1930s as a pencil and paper pastime, but in 1967, Milton Bradley introduced the plastic version we all remember, and by the 70s, it was a family night classic. Sitting across from your opponent, shielded by your upright case, you'd plot your fleet carefully. Destroyers, submarines, aircraft carriers, all lined up in ways you swear were foolproof. And then the suspense began. B7. Miss. C5. Hit. The tension built with every call. Would they find your battleship next? Could you outsmart them by tucking your carrier along the edge? The little red pegs marking hits created a slow, inevitable march toward victory or defeat. What made Battleship special wasn't just the strategy, it was the drama. Kids felt like real tacticians, parents enjoyed the simplicity, and everyone laughed at the exaggerated groans when the final ship went down. It was proof that a little imagination, a handful of pegs, and a sense of competition could turn an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. Frisbee craze. There was nothing quite like the sight of a bright plastic disc cutting through a summer sky. In the 1970s, the Frisbee wasn't just a toy, it was a phenomenon. Whether you were in the backyard, at the park, or on a sandy beach, that simple curved disc could bring hours of fun. You launch it into the air, watching it glide effortlessly, sometimes perfectly smooth, and other times wobbling wildly into a neighbor's yard or straight into a tree. Though the Frisbee had been around since the late 1950s, it was the 1970s when it really soared. Whammo, the company behind it, marketed it everywhere, even inspiring new games like Frisbee Golf and the first whispers of Ultimate Frisbee on college campuses. They sold millions at just a couple of dollars each, making them an affordable treasure you could toss in a backpack or tuck under your arm. And who could forget the feel of it? That slick, slightly grainy plastic rim digging into your fingertips, the snap of your wrist as you sent it flying, the collective cheer when someone made an impossible diving catch. The Frisbee was freedom in circular form, a toy that connected friends, families, and entire communities under the open sky. Slip and slide. Summer in the 1970s meant running barefoot across the lawn and belly flopping onto a long strip of bright yellow plastic, water spraying in every direction. The slip and slide was simple. Attach the hose, unroll it, and suddenly your ordinary yard was transformed into the world's most exciting water park. Introduced by Whammo in the early 60s, the slip and slide hit its stride in the 70s as every kid begged their parents for one. Costing under $15, it was affordable enough to make its way into thousands of backyards. You remember the thrill, sprinting full speed, hitting the slick surface, and sliding until you either spun out in the grass or slammed joyfully into the puddle at the end. The smell of wet earth, the squeals of laughter, and the occasional grass stain were all part of the package. Of course, it wasn't without its mishaps. Every neighborhood had a kid who overshot the end or went home with a scraped knee. But that was part of the fun, reckless, messy, unforgettable. The slip and slide wasn't just about staying cool in the summer heat. It was about the freedom of being young, the excitement of simple thrills, and the joy of turning a hose and a tarp into endless memories. Skateboards. Nothing screamed 1970s cool quite like a skateboard. Kids zipped down driveways and sidewalks, their hair flying, their sneakers barely holding grip on those narrow wooden boards with their bright urethane wheels. If you were lucky enough to own one, you instantly became the neighborhood daredevil, trying tricks, racing friends, or just cruising to the corner store. While skateboarding had started in California in the 50s, it was the 1970s that turned it into a full-blown craze. The introduction of urethane wheels in 1972 was a game-changer. They gripped better, rolled smoother, and opened the door to tricks that were impossible before. Suddenly, empty swimming pools became skate parks, and magazines like Skateboarder began to spread the culture nationwide. The feeling was electric. The rumble of the wheels over cracked sidewalks, the rush of wind in your ears, the scrape of skin after a failed attempt. For kids, skateboards weren't just toys. They were tickets to independence. Parents might have seen danger, but to us, it was freedom. And though helmets and pads weren't common yet, a few scrapes were a small price to pay for the thrill of learning a new trick or mastering a downhill ride. In the 1970s, the skateboard wasn't just a fad. It was a lifestyle, and one that many never outgrew. Barbie's 1970s glow-up. Few toys captured the spirit of the 1970s like Barbie. She had already been a household name since the late 1950s, but by the time Malibu Barbie arrived in 1971, with her golden tan, long blonde hair, and bright blue swimsuit, she was suddenly the ultimate icon of groovy California living. For kids, Barbie wasn't just a doll. She was a window into a glamorous world of beach parties, roller skates, and fashion statements that mirrored the changing times. The joy of Barbie in the 1970s wasn't only in the doll itself, but in the endless accessories. Shag-carpeted Barbie dream houses, convertible cars in neon colors, and entire wardrobes filled with bell-bottoms, maxi dresses, and even disco-inspired outfits. The smell of new plastic as you open the box, the feel of those tiny shoes that always seem to disappear under the couch, the satisfying snap of doll clothes fitting just right. It was all part of the experience. Barbie also sparked hours of storytelling. Entire soap operas unfolded in living rooms, with Barbie dating Ken one day, running a boutique the next, and saving the world by Friday. She was aspirational, playful, and just a little glamorous. In the 1970s, Barbie wasn't just a doll. She was a cultural icon who reflected the dreams and fashions of the decade. G.I. Joe adventures. If Barbie was the queen of imaginative play, G.I. Joe was her adventurous counterpart. By the 1970s, the 12-inch G.I. Joe figures had evolved beyond their original soldier uniforms into adventure team heroes. Suddenly, kids weren't just reenacting battles, they were diving deep into the ocean, exploring dense jungles, or piloting spacecraft to unknown worlds. The figures came with beards, fuzzy, lifelike hair, and a lineup of accessories that made playtime feel limitless. There were scuba tanks, survival kits, and even a working winch on the famous Adventure Team headquarters playset. The tactile thrill of snapping a tiny backpack onto Joe's shoulders or clipping a grappling hook to his hand added a layer of realism that kids adored. And who could forget the iconic Kung Fu grip? Introduced in 1974, it allowed the figures to actually hold on to gear, giving them a whole new level of personality. The packaging proudly announced it, and kids tested it immediately by stuffing rifles, ropes, or even Barbie's purse into Joe's hand. For many, G.I. Joe was a best friend, a hero, and a stand-in for adventures too big for the backyard. Long before video games let us play explorers, Joe was already taking us around the world and beyond, one imaginative mission at a time. Stretch Armstrong. Now here was a toy that felt downright bizarre the first time you touched it. Stretch Armstrong looked like a muscle-bound superhero, but his secret wasn't his strength, it was his stretch. You could pull his arms across the room, knot his legs together, or twist his torso into impossible shapes, and somehow he always snapped back to normal. Introduced by Kenner in 1976, Stretch quickly became a curiosity as much as a toy. Inside that rubbery latex skin was a gooey, almost syrupy filling that gave him his strange elasticity. Kids marveled at how far he could go, sometimes tugging until two friends were pulling in opposite directions just to see if he'd finally give way. Spoiler, many of us eventually ripped a Stretch open, only to discover the sticky, corn-syrupy mess inside. Part of Stretch's charm was the feel, slightly tacky, oddly heavy, and unlike any other toy on the shelf. He wasn't about storytelling or rules, he was about sheer tactile fun. How far could you bend him? Could he survive being tied around a chair? Could he fight G.I. Joe and live to tell the tale? Stretch Armstrong may not have had the glamour of Barbie or the adventures of G.I. Joe, but he was unforgettable. Weird, fun, and endlessly stretchable, he was the ultimate oddball of the 1970s toy box. Simon. Picture a darkened living room, a crowd of kids leaning in, and the sudden beep, boop, beep, beep echoing through the air. That was Simon, Hasbro's brilliant flashing memory game introduced in 1978. It looked like a UFO had landed on the coffee table. A round black disc with 4 giant colored buttons, red, blue, green, and yellow, that lit up in a pattern you had to repeat. The rules were simple, but the tension was real. The game would flash a short sequence, maybe red, then blue, and you'd repeat it. Easy enough, until it got longer and faster, with your heart racing as you tried to keep up. One wrong press, and the game responded with a harsh buzz that made everyone groan and laugh at the same time. The brilliance of Simon wasn't just its futuristic design, but its ability to bring people together. Families played it at the kitchen table, friends passed it around at sleepovers, and even adults couldn't resist just one more try. At about $25 when it launched, it wasn't the cheapest toy on the shelf, but it felt like a glimpse of the future, blinking lights and electronic sounds that seemed straight out of science fiction. Simon was more than a memory test. It was excitement, frustration, and triumph all packed into one glowing circle. Pong at home. Before Fortnite, before Mario, before even Pac-Man, there was Pong. By the mid-1970s, Pong had already taken arcades by storm, but when home consoles brought it to the family TV, everything changed. For the first time, kids and parents alike could turn on the television and actually play with it. The setup was simple: 2 paddles, a square ball, and a screen that flickered with every bounce. The boop, boop sound became the soundtrack of countless evenings. In 1972, Magnavox released the Odyssey, the very first home console, but it was Atari's version of Pong that really caught fire in American living rooms. Suddenly, that wood-paneled TV in the corner wasn't just for news or happy days, it was interactive. What made Pong so magical wasn't complexity, it was how futuristic it felt. Moving a controller and seeing something respond on screen was nothing short of revolutionary. Families gathered around, cheering each point, sometimes arguing whether the ball had actually hit the edge.
It wasn't cheap. The Odyssey originally cost around $100, a hefty price for the time, but kids begged, pleaded, and sometimes pooled allowance money just to be part of the video game revolution. Pong wasn't just a game, it was the dawn of a new era, a glowing glimpse of the digital future. Brite. If you ever played with a Brite, you can probably still picture that warm glow in a darkened room. The little black screen dotted with colorful plastic pegs, each one snapping into place with a satisfying click. First sold in 1967, but a huge hit throughout the 1970s, Brite was more than a toy. It was a miniature art studio that made every child feel like a designer. The process was simple. Place a black paper template against the board, push the translucent pegs through, and watch as tiny points of light illuminated your masterpiece. A clown, a butterfly, even the word "hi" glowed proudly on the screen. The smell of warm plastic from the bulb, the gentle hum of electricity, and the delight of switching off the room lights to admire your glowing artwork, all of it felt magical. What made Brite unforgettable was how it turned creativity into something tactile and luminous. Even kids who couldn't draw felt like artists when their glowing patterns came to life. And when you got bored of the templates, you simply made your own designs, experimenting with colors and shapes until you created something totally unique. Brite wasn't just about art, it was about imagination shining brighter than ever before. Etch-a-Sketch. Turn the knob left, then the knob right. Suddenly, a line appeared, shaky but triumphant. The Etch-a-Sketch, in its bright red frame with white knobs, had been around since the 1960s, but it remained a staple of playrooms well into the 1970s. It was part toy, part frustration machine, and part miracle. Inside, aluminum powder coated the glass screen, and as you turned the knobs, a little stylus scraped away the powder, leaving behind a silvery line. To kids, it felt like magic. You could make boxes, stairs, and, with enough patience, maybe even your name. Of course, one wrong twist could ruin hours of work, but that was part of the thrill. And when frustration finally won, you gave it the famous shake, wiping the screen clean with a soft whoosh, ready to start again. Priced at under $10, it was affordable, durable, and endlessly entertaining. Some kids became Etch-a-Sketch masters, producing intricate designs that seemed impossible, while most of us were content making crooked houses and stick figures. The best part? It didn't need batteries, paper, or ink, just imagination and persistence. The Etch-a-Sketch was more than a toy. It was a lesson in patience, creativity, and the joy of starting fresh. Spirograph. If you've ever seen a spirograph in action, you know the hypnotic wonder of watching a ballpoint pen trace perfect, swirling patterns across the page. Invented in the mid-1960s, but massively popular in the 1970s, the Spirograph turned math into art in the most delightful way. The kit was simple: clear plastic gears, rings, and wheels that you pinned to a piece of paper. Slip your pen into one of the holes, start moving it around, and suddenly, magic. Intricate looping designs spiraled into life, each one different depending on which gear or hole you used. The colors overlapped into mesmerizing patterns that looked almost psychedelic, perfectly suited to the era. The sound of the pen scratching over paper, the feel of the gears sliding smoothly under your fingers, and the surprise of each new pattern, it was addictive. Kids filled notebook after notebook with rainbow-colored spirals, proudly showing them off to parents or taping them to bedroom walls. For under $10, Spirograph felt like a science experiment, an art class, and a toy all in one. It was creativity with a sense of discovery. You never quite knew what you'd get until the pen made its final loop. Spirograph wasn't just a toy, it was a doorway into imagination, geometry, and pure wonder. Pet rock. And then, of course, there was the toy that wasn't really a toy at all, the infamous pet rock. In 1975, advertising executive Gary Dahl turned a joke into a nationwide fad by selling smooth, ordinary rocks as pets. Packaged in a little cardboard box with air holes, complete with a tongue-in-cheek training manual, each pet rock cost about $4, and unbelievably, millions of people bought them. Part of the charm was its absurdity. Kids would proudly show off their rock, sitting quietly in its box, behaving perfectly. No feeding, no walking, no accidents on the carpet, just a rock. Some kids drew faces on theirs, some built little habitats out of shoeboxes, and others simply enjoyed the silliness of owning the world's easiest pet. Looking back, it's easy to laugh at the craze, but at the time, it was genius. The pet rock tapped into the playful, carefree humor of the 70s. Parents rolled their eyes, but kids loved being part of the fad. And here's the funny part. Many people still have their original pet rock tucked away in an attic or drawer. Proof that even the simplest, silliest idea can become an unforgettable part of childhood. In its own way, the pet rock was a perfect snapshot of the decade's playful spirit.
As we close the lid on the toy box of the 1970s, it's hard not to feel a swell of warmth in your chest. These weren't just playthings made of plastic, rubber, or cardboard. They were the backdrop to our childhoods, the companions of lazy afternoons and long summer nights. They were the spark of imagination when we were stuck indoors on rainy days, the reason for laughter during family gatherings, and sometimes the cause of a few sibling squabbles that ended in giggles anyway. Looking back, what made these toys so magical wasn't their complexity. In fact, many were beautifully simple: a spinning wheel, a glowing peg, a sliding checker, or even a rock in a box. What mattered was what we brought to them: our creativity, our curiosity, and our boundless energy as kids. They gave us the freedom to dream, to compete, to create, and to connect with friends and family in a way that felt effortless. For those who grew up in the 70s, these toys are more than just relics, they're time machines. One glance at a Lite Brite or the sound of a Simon beep, and suddenly you're back in a shag-carpeted living room with a bowl of Jell-O on the counter and the evening news humming in the background. They remind us of a time when fun was simple, when our biggest worry was whose turn it was to spin the wheel or whether Stretch Armstrong would finally tear apart. And maybe that's the real gift these toys gave us. They taught us that joy can be found in the simplest of places: a patch of grass, a piece of plastic, or a few friends gathered around a game board. Decades later, the memories still glow, proving that while fads fade and technology changes, the spirit of play never really leaves us. So here's to the toys of the 1970s, our companions, our teachers, and our treasures. They may be tucked away in attics or displayed in vintage shops now, but in our hearts, they'll always be alive, sparking that same laughter and wonder that made childhood so unforgettable.